2 years after they seized power, the Taliban are being legitimized. And the support comes from usual quarters, Pakistan and China. They have granted the Taliban their wish. Afghanistan will join the Belt and Road Initiative. Its Pakistan leg is called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC or CPEC. It will now be extended to Afghanistan. The announcement came on Sunday after a meeting in Islamabad. The foreign ministers of Pakistan, China and Afghanistan met. They issued a joint statement. And this statement announced the extension of CPEC. So first, let's tell you more about CPEC. It's a showpiece project of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's China's massive infrastructure undertaking in Pakistan. So far, China has poured more than $60 billion into it. But CPEC is still a loss-making enterprise, and it has almost bankrupted Pakistan. The country is buried under Chinese debt, and it's struggling to keep up. The investments are massive. The returns negligible. Plus, there is political instability, even civil unrest over CPEC. Military groups are protesting against Chinese projects. They want to drive China out of Pakistan. Chinese assets are under growing threat in Pakistan. So long story short, CPEC is hurting both China and Pakistan. Then why do they want to extend it? If security and return on investment are challenges in Pakistan, imagine what it will be like in Afghanistan. It's a terrorist regime after all. Yet China has decided to invest. How does it plan to expand the project into Afghanistan? The joint statement does not mention the plan. It does not say what the plan is. It's just an expression of intent as of now, but reports say the groundwork has begun and the Taliban is quite keen to get on board. Well, why won't they? They're desperate for money, for any kind of investment. And China has been a willing partner. Earlier this year, they signed their first contracts, Beijing and Kabul. These were petroleum projects. Do you know who got the contract? A subsidiary of China National Petroleum Corporation. They will extract oil from the Amu Darya Basin. This is in northern Afghanistan. And this contract should tell you what Taliban brings to the table, the natural resources of Afghanistan. This country is said to be sitting on a ton of minerals, reserves of iron, copper and gold. They're scattered across provinces and they're worth almost $1 trillion. Hence China's interest and risk-taking appetite. If Afghanistan joins CPEC, China can access these reserves, these $1 trillion reserves. The Taliban could offer these in exchange for Chinese investment, and that's exactly what Beijing has been eyeing. So that's one reason why it wants to expand CPEC. But it's not the only reason. CPEC is proving to be a financial burden. Since inception, the project has been unsustainable. Simply too big for a country like Pakistan. As of May 2022, just 3 projects in Gwadar have been completed, 12 remain unfinished. Gwadar is the main hub for CPEC. China is building a massive port there. And it's been looking for more investors. First, China tried to rope in countries with actual money, countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but the initiatives did not materialize. Then Beijing tried to woo regional players like Turkey and Uzbekistan. Again, no luck. So Afghanistan was perhaps the last remaining option. China will work with the Taliban to revive CPEC. It hasn't officially recognized the regime, but investment, we say, is as good as official recognition. This is basically a rescue deal to deleverage Pakistan and to extend China's debt trap into Afghanistan. So a clear win-win for Beijing. Even though the larger picture for BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, looks grim. This, like I said, was Xi Jinping's pet project. It was conceived to extend China's influence in the world, but Belt and Road is now a story of roadblocks and multiple defaults. Let me show you some numbers. In 2022, 60% of China's overseas lending went to borrowers in distress. China has invested in more than 1,200 projects across the world. Reports say nearly 10% of these have failed or are delayed. And soon, BRI could witness a high-profile departure. I'm talking about Italy. Italy joined the BRI in 2019 with much fanfare, but now Rome is rethinking its membership. There's a growing anti-China sentiment in Europe, and it has put Italy in a tricky spot. In 2021, Rome froze the partnership with China, and now it could be planning a complete exit. Reports say a decision is expected later this month. It may be announced at the G7 summit in Japan. G7 is the group of 7 biggest economies of the world. Italy is a member. Its exit from BRI will be a major setback for China, perhaps the first of many. So as India takes strides towards the future, some nations are turning the clock back, like Zimbabwe. It has reintroduced gold as a currency. That's right, Zimbabwe has launched new digital tokens. They are backed by gold. It's a move to replace Zimbabwe's actual currency. It's called the Zimbabwe dollar. What explains this move? To answer that, I must tell you about Zimbabwe's economy. It's in a bad shape, and that's an understatement. Inflation has shot through the roof. In December 2022, inflation touched a whopping 280%. It's not inflation anymore, it's what economists call hyperinflation. The Zimbabwe dollar is in trouble. It lost more than half of its value during 2022. You needed 2,200 Zimbabwe dollar for $1. 2,200 Zimbabwe dollars for $1. Now the currency has stabilized a bit, but it's yet to make a full recovery. What's the exchange rate now? About 360 Zimbabwe dollars for $1. The government is trying to contain the fall, hence the switch to gold. In July last year, physical gold coins were pushed into the market. They were made available as currency. People could buy them using the Zimbabwe dollar. And now Zimbabwe has introduced digital gold. It works just like the physical gold scheme. You can buy them using the money you have. But why switch to gold? Zimbabwe says this will help in stabilizing the currency. How? By cooling the demand for the US dollar in the country. You see, when the crisis began, people started exchanging the local currency for the US dollar. That's because the US dollar, had more value. Now the government wants gold to replace the US dollar and contain the crisis. It's an ambitious experiment. Experts are not sure it will work, though. Although Zimbabwe is not the only country toying with this idea, in recent years, many countries have adopted digital currencies, and that too in different forms. But few have managed to take off. Take the case of El Salvador. In 2021, it recognized Bitcoin as legal tender. It was the first country to do so. El Salvador's central bank put Bitcoin in its reserves. Citizens were allowed to pay taxes in Bitcoin. Businesses were asked to accept Bitcoin as payment. Why did El Salvador turn to Bitcoin? Because of its economic situation. Its public debt had crossed 100% of its GDP. The US dollar was the official currency of El Salvador, but it was unable to borrow using the dollar. So it turned to Bitcoin. Today, it accepts both the US dollar and Bitcoin. Now, initially, the move caught the world's attention, but the experiment has not really delivered. In fact, the switch to Bitcoin has proved to be costly for this country. El Salvador spent $375 million on the Bitcoin project. As of last year, the country had lost $60 million on this bet, primarily due to low adoption, meaning not many people made the switch, and also because of the fluctuating value of Bitcoin. So that's the El Salvador story. Elsewhere, there are more experiments happening. Central banks around the world are mulling their own digital currency, like Sweden, like China, Norway, Japan. They're all exploring options. In fact, a total of 114 countries are exploring the idea. They represent 95% of the world's GDP. So far, 11 countries have launched a digital currency. This list includes India too. In December last year, India had launched a pilot project for the rupee. But this is fundamentally different from what Zimbabwe is doing, from Zimbabwe's monetary experiment. Because most central banks are not using gold or Bitcoin, they're building their own digital currency. And these are linked to their official currencies, not to other assets. And why is this difference significant? Let me explain. Prices of gold or Bitcoin are determined by the market. But a central bank digital currency is issued and operated by the state. So it tends to be more stable. It's less vulnerable to external shocks. Now, these are mostly experiments, but they're worth documenting because one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Digital money is the future of currency. Governments must explore. But they must also remember that only robust mechanisms will survive. El Salvador tried the Bitcoin, it failed. Zimbabwe is turning to digital gold, it may not work. These are, at best, stopgap arrangements. They fail to address the real problems in these economies, the problems of inflation and debt. For our next story, let's talk about white supremacy. It's a belief. It claims that white people are a superior race. It's both alarming and outrageous. A decade ago, it was propagated by groups like the Ku Klux Klan. They castrated people with razors, dislodged the eyes of their victims, and derailed trains. Today, such incidents are rare. But white supremacy continues to thrive in the shadows. And in the US, it manifests through gun terror. You may have seen headlines of yet another mass shooting in America. This one was in a mall in Texas. Now it's being linked to white supremacy. And it's not a one-off case. Last year, 80% of such shootings were committed by alleged white supremacists. Here's a report.
Schools, workplaces, shopping malls. We pass through these public spaces every day. We expect a basic level of safety associated with them. But if you live in the US, maybe that's too high an expectation, because in that country, these are spaces of terror, under attack by the epidemic of mass shootings. This story is not new. It's a daily affair in America. It has seen more mass shootings than days in 2023. More than 200 shootings in 128 days. The latest one happened in Texas over the weekend. At an outdoor shopping outlet in the city of Allen, a gunman got out of his car and began firing at shooters. Witnesses described scenes of panic and horror. Children hid inside dressing rooms. Shoppers ran to the back, desperately trying to stay out of the shooter's line of fire. Some were shouting, alerting others to run for their lives. It was a rampage. Eventually, it came to an end. A police officer had shot the gunman dead, but that was after he had already killed 8 people, including children.
I felt really scared because many people were running for their lives and some people didn't survive. Some got injured. I'm still feeling scared because it could happen to us at school, it could happen to us at another mall.
Our heart's broken about it. There's a crisis in America. I think it's a political system that would rather blame the other party as opposed to see that we have a major mental health crisis in America.
An investigation is underway. Police are trying to uncover the motive of the gunman, and reports say the focus is on the gunman's ideological leanings. The police believe he had white supremacist links. During the attack, he wore a clothing patch with the letters RWDS. This stands for Right-Wing Death Squad. It's popular among right-wing extremists and white supremacy groups. What is white supremacy? A belief that white people form a superior race. Therefore, they should dominate the society. This belief has been the reason behind numerous deaths, often deaths by torture, because white supremacists believe in exclusion, or worse, the harm of other racial groups. Mass shootings and extremism are linked in America, and the linkages are growing. It's about 3 times higher than it was a decade ago. And of all the extremism related to mass shootings in America last year, 80% were committed by white supremacists. So was the gunman motivated by a similar ideology? There are no clear answers yet. But what's stopping anyone from taking out a rifle and shooting people on the street? Not the gun laws in the US, and certainly not the authorities. The governor of Texas continues to dig in his heels. He still doesn't want to consider a ban on gun ownership. So while the people of America continue to lose their lives and the gun epidemic destroys and devastates families, their government watches this horror unfold as bystanders, and victims of gun violence end up as mere statistics.
Now, a stalled BRI is good news for India and the West. Question is, what do they do about it? Do they wait for the BRI to implode, or do they get proactive? I would say option 2. Now is the time to go on the offensive. One such plan seems to be in the works. It's a massive connectivity project. The plan is to link all West Asian countries with trains, those in the Gulf, those in the Levant, and all of them will be connected by train. These trains will lead to shipping ports in the Gulf, and those ports will connect the region to India. So it's a cross-continental plan. Trains will integrate West Asia, ships will connect West Asia to India. So who's on board? 4 countries at the moment. It's the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia and India. Their national security advisors met in Saudi Arabia on Sunday. India was represented by NSA Ajit Doval. He held talks with his 3 counterparts. But where exactly did this plan come from? Apparently Israel. Now you may remember the West Asian Quad, also called the I2U2. The 4 members are Israel and India, that's I2, and the UAE and the US, U2. It was set up in 2021 to counter China's influence in the region. In one of the I2U2 meetings, Israel reportedly proposed this, a rail link to integrate West Asia. The White House ran with this plan, and since they looped Saudi Arabia in, Israel could not be part of the project, but reports say that could soon change. It could change in the future. And what about India? Where does India figure in this plan? New Delhi is bringing in the expertise, and frankly, it's a no-brainer. India has the fourth largest railway network in the world. Total passengers, around 24 million every day, plus 203 million tons of freight. Nobody knows better when it comes to railway integration. So that's how the plan came around. But what's in it for each party? For the US, it's a chance to contain China's influence, to offer an alternative to the BRI, also to patch up ties with Saudi Arabia. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is no fan of Joe Biden. He's been reaching out to Beijing lately. Even let them broker a peace deal with Iran, so Washington is eager to retain its old ally. For Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the gain is material. A solid railway network in the region, it means more connectivity, easier trade and easier tourism. For India, there are multiple gains. The obvious one, of course, is connectivity. India's trade with Gulf countries is almost $154 billion. Most of that is oil. The shipping lanes could help increase the trade. It will also help the Indian community living in the Gulf. How many people are we talking about? More than 85 lakh. They are the backbone of most Gulf economies. That's the economic side of things. Politically, this project is even more important for India. And I'll tell you why. Iran and Saudi Arabia recently normalized relations. It looks like India had no clue about it. Even worse, the deal was brokered by China. This trend cannot be allowed to grow, the trend of ceding strategic space to Beijing. It happened with Iran in 2020. China signed a 25-year cooperation agreement with Tehran. If the same happens with Gulf states, India is going to lose out. That's why this railway project is so important, because West Asia is changing and India must keep up. Look at what's happening in Syria. Bashar al-Assad's regime is back in the Arab League. It was removed in 2011 during the civil war, but now West Asia is embracing Assad again. Last week, Iran's president visited Syria. Soon after, foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia and Egypt visited. My point is, there is a growing clamor for normalcy, to put conflicts behind, to live in stability, if not peace. Connectivity will be key to that dream. Just look at Europe, for instance. The European Union's origins were economic, not political. Today, those countries are joined at the hip. They don't fight, not because they love each other, but because it would be self-destructive. And I'm not saying that West Asia has reached that stage. I'm saying that should be the goal. And India should actively contribute to it. Push for a multipolar West Asia, not beholden to China or the US. India has the goodwill and the skill to do that. So the West Asian Rail project is a good start, but let's hope it actually goes beyond the blueprint. Let's hope this one actually gets implemented. I have news for you, and for a change, it's not about war or an impending recession or a virus. It's more personal, and it's good news. Firstpost has crossed 1 million subscribers on YouTube. In our world of more than 8 billion people, this may seem like a very small number, but for me and my team, it means a lot, more than we can put in words. And I'm here to thank you for your support, because this has been a very special journey, both personally and professionally. In a country with 400 news channels, who needs another news platform? We asked ourselves this question every day as we put together the show for you. Why should you watch us? Why should you subscribe to us? We think of this every day. When we started in January, we had less than 200,000 subscribers. It was a very, very small base, but you cheered us from the word go. We launched Vantage on the 26th of January this year, and you joined our journey. In a post-pandemic world, going viral can be a tricky affair, but trust me when I say this, we are not complaining about this virality. You watched and shared our stories, and they started coming back to us. It's the biggest prize, I say. If you think I'm getting carried away, please bear with me. Like I said, this has been special. It's been a learning curve. Because we knew our stories, we understood our subjects, but we were getting used to the medium. You helped us with feedback and so many comments. Thank you for writing. You told us what won't work and what we shouldn't be doing. Thank you for critiquing. And you kept coming back every day to watch us. Thank you for watching and subscribing. We hear you, so keep the conversation going. We truly believe that in this day and age, time is more valuable than anything. And you give us your time. We're committed to making it worthwhile, to highlighting India's perspective on global issues, to tracking developments that shape our world, to reading between the lines and to telling stories that really matter. In the weeks and months ahead, we will bring you more shows. We are entering a very exciting phase. We want to experiment. We want to take you where the story is. You know, they're right when they say that storytelling is the most powerful way to put ideas in the world today. And you help us hone that skill. So thank you for making us 1 million strong. I say, we're only getting started. Paris has been cities across France.
And there they go. It looks like
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.